Expectations are rarely announced out loud. They form quietly over years, shaped by culture, habit, memory, and love. In families, expectations around roles and milestones are especially powerful because they are built on history. Parents remember being present for first steps, first days of school, celebrations, crises, and achievements. Over time, this presence evolves into an internal narrative: I am part of the important moments. This narrative is not usually spoken, negotiated, or questioned. It simply exists, reinforced by repetition. The emotional friction begins when reality disrupts this invisible storyline. Unspoken expectations are often mistaken for mutual agreements. A parent may assume they will be informed about major life events, while an adult child may assume their independence is understood. Neither assumption is inherently wrong, but when they collide, disappointment emerges. The pain does not come solely from the event itself, but from the sudden realization that two people were operating under different emotional contracts. One believed inclusion was implied, the other believed autonomy was obvious. Because these beliefs were never articulated, the resulting gap feels personal rather than structural. Family roles intensify this dynamic. Roles such as parent, child, in-law, or elder come loaded with cultural scripts. These scripts dictate who informs whom, who seeks approval, and who is consulted before decisions are made. When life follows the script, harmony feels effortless. When life deviates, the discomfort can feel like disrespect, even when no disrespect was intended. This is how reality, when unexpected, becomes emotionally charged. Milestones amplify expectations because they are symbolic, not just practical. A wedding, a move, a career decision, or a birth represents more than an event. It represents transition. For parents, milestones often mark the passage of time and the gradual release of control. Being included in these moments can feel like validation of continued relevance. Being excluded can feel like sudden invisibility. The emotional reaction, then, is less about the logistics of the event and more about what the event symbolizes in the relationship. Reality, however, operates under different rules than expectation. Reality is shaped by urgency, fear, convenience, secrecy, excitement, or emotional immaturity. Sometimes decisions are made quickly. Sometimes they are made privately to avoid conflict. Sometimes they are made without considering how others might feel, not out of malice, but out of focus on the immediate relationship at hand. Reality does not pause to align itself with everyone's internal expectations. The emotional friction arises when expectation assumes intentionality where there may be none. A parent might think, "They didn't tell me because I don't matter," while the adult child might think, "I didn't tell them because it was simpler this way." These two interpretations exist in parallel, each emotionally logical to the person holding it. Without reflection, this gap can harden into resentment. Another critical layer is generational difference. Older generations often associate family closeness with shared information and collective decision-making. Younger generations, shaped by different social norms, may associate closeness with emotional support rather than procedural involvement. To one side, not being informed feels like distance. To the other, informing feels unnecessary or even intrusive. Neither view is universally correct, but both feel deeply right to the individual. Expectations also become more rigid when they are tied to identity. A parent may unconsciously define themselves as the one who is always consulted or the one who organizes family milestones. When reality contradicts this identity, it triggers not just disappointment, but an identity threat. The question becomes, who am I now if my role has changed without my consent? This is why reactions can feel disproportionate to the event itself. The pain is rooted in role displacement, not just surprise. Emotional friction is further intensified by timing. Sudden revelations leave no room for psychological preparation. The mind prefers gradual transitions. Abrupt changes activate stress responses. When expectation and reality clash without warning, the nervous system interprets it as loss. Even if nothing tangible was taken away, the imagined future collapses, and grief follows. This grief is often misunderstood or minimized, both by others and by oneself. Education around this dynamic requires reframing expectations as hypotheses, not entitlements. An expectation is a prediction about how others will behave, not a guarantee. When treated as a guarantee, disappointment turns into blame. When treated as a hypothesis, disappointment turns into information. The shift from "this should have happened" to "this is what happened, what does it tell me?" creates emotional flexibility. Another educational insight is recognizing that expectations often lag behind reality. Relationships evolve faster than our internal models of them. A child may be fully adult in their decision-making, while a parent's expectations still reflect an earlier stage of dependency. This lag is natural, but unmanaged, it creates repeated friction. Updating expectations is not a betrayal of love, it is an adaptation to growth. Communication plays a preventative role, but it is not a cure-all. Many families believe that talking more will eliminate disappointment. In reality, even with open communication, some expectations remain unconscious. What matters is not perfect foresight, but the ability to process unmet expectations without turning them into moral judgments. Saying "I felt hurt because I expected to know" is very different from saying "you were wrong not to tell me." The first invites understanding, the second invites defensiveness. It is also important to distinguish between expectation and boundary. An expectation hopes for a certain outcome. A boundary defines what one will do to protect emotional well-being. When expectations are violated, people sometimes respond by erecting punitive boundaries, withdrawal, silence, or resentment. Education helps clarify that boundaries should regulate the self, not control others. A healthy response might be adjusting future expectations rather than demanding retroactive compliance. Reality, when it disrupts expectations, offers data about relational dynamics. It reveals how decisions are made, how autonomy is prioritized, and how communication flows. Interpreted wisely, this data can guide healthier interactions moving forward. Interpreted emotionally, it can freeze the relationship in a moment of hurt. The difference lies in meaning-making. Meaning-making determines whether disappointment becomes wisdom or bitterness. If the meaning assigned is, "I am no longer important," the emotional outcome is insecurity. If the meaning assigned is "the relationship is changing," the emotional outcome is adjustment. Change is uncomfortable, but it is not inherently harmful. Resistance to change is what creates prolonged suffering. Family systems thrive when expectations are flexible and revisable. Flexibility does not mean the absence of desire for inclusion, it means accepting that inclusion may look different over time. A parent may no longer be informed before decisions, but may still be valued after them. Learning to accept this sequencing, after rather than before, is a significant emotional milestone in itself. Ultimately, expectations versus reality is not a problem to be solved, but a tension to be managed. As long as relationships evolve, expectations will be challenged. Education lies in teaching individuals to examine their expectations, name their emotions without accusation, and update their internal models of connection. When this happens, reality no longer feels like a threat, it becomes a teacher. When unspoken expectations are brought into awareness, they lose their power to wound silently. They can be negotiated, released, or transformed. Reality may still surprise, but it no longer destabilizes identity. Instead, it invites maturity, the capacity to love without controlling, to stay connected without insisting on centrality, and to honor change without interpreting it as loss. Autonomy in adult relationships does not arrive in a single moment. It emerges gradually, often unevenly, and sometimes invisibly. For parents, the shift from authority to mutual respect can feel subtle until it suddenly isn't, until a decision is made without consultation, a boundary is enforced without explanation, or a life choice is revealed after the fact. Psychologically, this transition is not just about children growing up, it is about parents relearning how to relate to them. Authority, once necessary and functional, must give way to recognition, trust, and equality. This is not a loss of connection, but a redefinition of it. In childhood, authority is essential. It provides safety, structure, and guidance. Parents are expected to decide, direct, and protect. Over time, children internalize this authority, using it as a framework to develop judgment and self-regulation. However, when adulthood arrives, the internalized authority is meant to replace the external one. The psychological challenge arises when this handover is incomplete or emotionally resisted. Parents may still feel responsible for outcomes, while adult children feel responsible for their own choices. This mismatch creates tension, even in loving families. The difficulty lies in the emotional residue of earlier roles. Authority is not only a function, it is an identity. Being the one who knows, the one who decides, or the one who approves becomes intertwined with self-worth. When adult children stop seeking permission, it can feel like rejection rather than development. The parent may interpret autonomy as distance, while the adult child experiences it as self-respect. These interpretations clash not because of intention, but because of different psychological needs at different life stages. Mutual respect requires recognizing adulthood as a distinct developmental phase with its own psychological tasks. One of these tasks is individuation, the process of defining oneself as separate from one's family of origin. Individuation does not mean emotional cutoff. It means emotional differentiation. An adult child can love, care for, and remain connected to parents while making independent decisions. Yet this distinction is often misunderstood. Parents may equate closeness with involvement in decision-making, while adult children may equate closeness with emotional support rather than oversight. This shift is particularly challenging in cultures or families where hierarchy is deeply ingrained. Respect has traditionally flowed upward, and authority has been age-based rather than competence-based. In such systems, autonomy can feel like insubordination. However, psychological maturity reframes respect as reciprocal. Mutual respect does not erase differences in experience, it acknowledges them without enforcing control. Parents still have wisdom, they simply no longer have jurisdiction. A common emotional response during this transition is anxiety. Parents may worry about their children's choices, fearing mistakes or consequences. This worry often fuels attempts to maintain influence through advice that feels unsolicited, questions that feel intrusive, or disappointment that feels like pressure. From the parent's perspective, these behaviors stem from care. From the adult child's perspective, they can feel like mistrust. Autonomy thrives on being trusted, it withers under surveillance. The psychological shift toward mutual respect requires parents to tolerate uncertainty. Authority provides predictability, autonomy introduces ambiguity. When parents are no longer in control, they must sit with not knowing, not deciding, and not intervening unless invited. This can be deeply uncomfortable, especially for those whose identity has been built around responsibility. Learning to say, "I trust you to handle this," even when fear is present, is a profound act of emotional growth. For adult children, autonomy comes with its own psychological burden. Independence means accountability. Decisions cannot be blamed on parental direction. Successes and failures are owned. This responsibility can be heavy, which is why some adult children oscillate between independence and dependence. They may want freedom, but also reassurance. When parents respond with respect rather than control, it creates a secure base from which autonomy can stabilize rather than fluctuate. Mutual respect also involves a change in communication patterns. Authority-based communication is directive, respect-based communication is dialogical. Instead of telling, parents learn to ask. Instead of correcting, they learn to listen. Instead of assuming influence, they wait to be invited. This does not mean parents must suppress their opinions, it means they offer them without attachment to outcome. Advice becomes a gift, rather than a demand. Psychologically, this shift challenges the fear of irrelevance. Many parents unconsciously fear that if they are no longer needed, they will no longer matter. Autonomy can trigger this fear sharply. However, relevance in adult relationships is not measured by control, but by emotional availability. Being someone an adult child chooses to turn to, rather than someone they must report to, is a deeper form of connection. Choice carries more intimacy than obligation. Boundaries play a central role in this transition. Adult relationships require clear boundaries to protect individuality. When parents respect boundaries, they signal recognition of adulthood. When boundaries are ignored, even with good intentions, they undermine trust. Respecting boundaries does not weaken the relationship, it stabilizes it. It allows closeness to be voluntary rather than enforced. Another psychological dimension is grief. Letting go of authority involves mourning the end of a particular phase of parenting. This grief is often unacknowledged because the child is still alive and present. Yet something has ended the role of primary decision-maker. Naming this grief internally allows parents to process it without projecting it onto their children through guilt or control. Mutual respect also requires emotional equality. While parents and adult children will never be peers in experience, they can be peers in dignity. Emotional equality means recognizing that adult children's feelings, values, and choices carry the same legitimacy as one's own. Disagreeing without invalidating becomes a key skill. Respect is demonstrated not by agreement, but by acknowledgement. Autonomy reshapes family loyalty as well. Loyalty shifts from compliance to honesty. Adult children show loyalty not by following parental expectations, but by staying emotionally connected while living authentically. Parents show loyalty by supporting authenticity even when it challenges tradition or personal preference. This mutual loyalty strengthens bonds over time. The educational task in understanding this shift is to separate influence from control. Influence grows through trust, consistency, and respect. Control diminishes influence by breeding resistance. Parents who release control often find that their influence increases because it is no longer feared. Adult children become more open when they do not feel managed. Ultimately, autonomy and adult relationships require a shared acknowledgement. Love does not entitle one to authority over another's life. Love entitles one to care, concern, and connection, but not command. When parents embrace this truth, they move from being directors of their children's lives to being companions in them. This psychological shift is not linear. There will be moments of regression, misunderstanding, and conflict. What sustains the relationship is not perfection, but willingness to recalibrate. Each act of respect repairs what authority once maintained. Each moment of trust replaces control with confidence. In this space of mutual respect, relationships mature, conversations deepen, differences coexist without threat, and autonomy, rather than creating distance, becomes the very condition that allows genuine closeness to endure. Emotional regulation in moments of surprise is one of the most demanding psychological skills in human relationships because surprise bypasses preparation. When something unexpected happens, the mind does not have time to organize meaning, assess intention, or filter reaction. Instead, the nervous system responds first. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, thoughts race, and emotions surge forward seeking immediate expression. In these moments, what is felt often feels urgent, justified, and undeniable. Yet what is expressed in that urgency can shape relationships for years to come. Surprise triggers a biological response before a cognitive one. The brain registers sudden information as a potential threat, even when the content is not dangerous. This is why shock can feel destabilizing and personal. The body reacts as if something important has been taken away or violated. Emotional regulation begins with recognizing that this initial reaction is not a verdict, it is a physiological alarm. Treating it as temporary rather than authoritative creates space between feeling and action. Disappointment and hurt intensify surprise because they activate expectations. When reality collides with what was anticipated, the mind searches for meaning. In the absence of clarity, it often assigns blame. This is not because blame is accurate, but because it provides emotional structure. Blame answers the question why quickly, even if incorrectly. Emotional regulation requires slowing this process down and resisting the temptation to settle on the first interpretation that reduces discomfort. The most damaging responses in moments of surprise are rarely intentional. They emerge from unfiltered emotion rather than considered values. A sharp comment, a withdrawn silence, or a confrontational question can become relational landmarks, moments that are remembered long after the facts fade. What makes these reactions harmful is not their intensity, but their timing. Expressing raw emotion before understanding solidifies misunderstanding. One of the first steps in regulation is containment. Containment does not mean suppression. It means allowing emotion to exist without letting it dictate behavior. Internally, this may involve naming the feeling, shock, sadness, anger, or fear. Naming slows the nervous system by engaging the reflective parts of the brain. It transforms emotion from a flood into an experience that can be observed. Time is a crucial regulator. Immediate reactions feel honest, but they are often incomplete. With time, emotional intensity decreases and nuance emerges. What initially felt like betrayal may later be understood as avoidance, fear, or immaturity. Delaying response is not avoidance, it is strategic care for the relationship. It protects against saying something that cannot be unsaid. Another critical element is separating impact from intention. Surprise magnifies impact and obscures intention. Emotional regulation involves acknowledging the hurt without assuming malicious intent. This distinction allows for accountability without condemnation. It creates a pathway for dialogue rather than defense. Saying this was painful for me invites conversation. Saying you hurt me on purpose shuts it down. Regulation also requires tolerating emotional ambiguity. It is possible to feel hurt and still care, to feel disappointed and still respect, to feel shocked and still remain open. The mind often seeks clarity by polarizing emotions into right and wrong. Emotional maturity allows contradictory feelings to coexist without forcing resolution too quickly. The urge to seek immediate explanation is another challenge. In moments of surprise, people often ask questions that are not requests for understanding, but expressions of distress. These questions can sound accusatory even when curiosity is intended. Learning to postpone inquiry until emotional intensity subsides prevents escalation. Curiosity expressed calmly invites honesty. Curiosity expressed emotionally invites defensiveness. Emotional regulation is also about protecting future communication. How a surprise is handled sets a precedent. If reactions are explosive or punitive, others learn to withhold information. If reactions are regulated and reflective, others learn that honesty is safe. This long-term consequence is often overlooked in the heat of the moment. Regulation is not just about the present feeling, it is about the future relationship. Self-soothing techniques play a practical role. Deep breathing, physical movement, grounding exercises, or even temporary distraction can reduce physiological arousal. These are not distractions from the issue. They are preparations for addressing it effectively. A regulated body supports a regulated conversation. Another educational insight is understanding that hurt often masks vulnerability. Beneath anger or disappointment is usually fear. Fear of being excluded, replaced, or no longer valued. Recognizing this allows individuals to respond from self-awareness rather than reactivity. When vulnerability is acknowledged internally, it does not need to be expressed through accusation. Emotional regulation also involves choice. Feelings arise involuntarily, responses do not. This distinction empowers individuals to act in alignment with their values rather than their impulses. Choosing to respond with calm does not invalidate the pain. It honors the relationship. Values become the compass when emotions are loud. Listening to oneself is as important as being heard by others. Processing emotions privately, through reflection, writing, or trusted conversation, clarifies what truly needs to be communicated. Often, what needs to be shared is not the shock itself, but the meaning attached to it. Articulating meaning rather than emotion reduces defensiveness and increases understanding. Regulation does not mean avoiding difficult conversations. It means having them at the right time and in the right tone. Timing communicates respect. Tone communicates safety. Together, they determine whether a conversation heals or harms. Waiting until emotions are integrated rather than raw is an act of relational responsibility. There is also a compassionate aspect to emotional regulation. People often judge themselves harshly for their emotional reactions. This self-criticism adds shame to distress, making regulation harder. Self-compassion allows individuals to acknowledge difficulty without self-attack. It creates emotional steadiness, from which thoughtful action can emerge. Long-term relationships depend less on the absence of hurt and more on repair. Emotional regulation enables repair by preventing unnecessary damage. Even when missteps occur, regulated follow-up, apologizing, clarifying, and re-engaging restores trust. What matters is not perfect control, but commitment to repair. Surprise will always be part of human connection because people are independent and unpredictable. Emotional regulation does not eliminate pain. It transforms how pain is carried and communicated. It allows individuals to stay present rather than reactive, curious rather than accusatory, and honest without being harmful. Ultimately, learning to regulate emotions in moments of surprise is learning to respect both the self and the relationship simultaneously. It is the ability to say internally, "This hurts," while saying externally, "I want to understand." In that balance, relationships are not protected from difficulty, but they are protected from destruction. Reframing events as growth opportunities begins with a simple but difficult recognition. Unexpected moments are inevitable, but the meaning we assign to them is optional. When something happens that disrupts expectations, the mind instinctively searches for explanation and judgment. This search is often guided by emotion rather than insight. The initial interpretation tends to be personal, absolute, and emotionally charged. Reframing does not deny the pain or confusion of the moment. It changes the lens through which the moment is understood, allowing it to become a source of learning rather than division. Unexpected events feel threatening because they interrupt the sense of order that relationships rely on. Families, in particular, depend on predictability to maintain emotional safety. When that predictability breaks, the reaction is often defensive. People seek someone to blame, a rule that was broken, or a standard that was violated. This response creates conflict because it prioritizes restoring control over restoring connection. Reframing invites a different priority, understanding before judgment. The first step in reframing is slowing down the narrative. The mind tends to compress complex situations into simple stories. These stories often center on intention, who did what and why. In moments of surprise, the story usually assigns negative intent because it matches the emotional tone of the experience. Reframing requires holding the story loosely and allowing alternative explanations to exist alongside the first one. This cognitive flexibility reduces emotional intensity and opens space for empathy. Empathy does not require agreement. It requires imagination. It asks, what might this have been like from the other side? This question shifts focus from personal hurt to relational context. It recognizes that people act from their own fears, pressures, and limitations. When empathy is introduced, the event stops being a verdict on the relationship and becomes a window into the other person's inner world. Reframing also involves separating the event from the relationship. An unexpected action can be disappointing without defining the entire bond. When events are treated as evidence of character or love, relationships become fragile. When events are treated as moments within a larger story, relationships become resilient. This distinction prevents escalation and protects long-term connection. Growth-oriented reframing looks for meaning rather than fault. Instead of asking, "Who is wrong?" it asks, "What is being revealed?" Unexpected moments often reveal unspoken expectations, unclear boundaries, or mismatched assumptions. They highlight areas where communication has been implicit rather than explicit. Seen this way, the event becomes diagnostic rather than destructive. Family relationships benefit particularly from this perspective because they are long-term systems, not isolated interactions. In long-term systems, conflict is less about individual moments and more about patterns. Reframing allows families to see patterns without moralizing them. It transforms frustration into information. Information, unlike blame, can be acted upon productively. Another key aspect of reframing is recognizing developmental transitions. Many unexpected events occur at points of change: adulthood, partnership, parenthood, or independence. These transitions require new relational rules, but those rules are rarely discussed openly. When old expectations meet new realities, friction occurs. Reframing acknowledges that the discomfort is part of growth rather than a sign of failure. Empathy deepens when individuals recognize their own limits. Everyone has acted in ways that unintentionally hurt others. Remembering this reduces the impulse to judge harshly. It humanizes the situation. Growth comes not from being right, but from being reflective. Reframing also protects dignity. Conflict escalates when people feel misunderstood or shamed. When an unexpected event is approached with curiosity instead of accusation, it preserves dignity on both sides. Dignity creates safety, and safety allows honest conversation. Honest conversation is where real connection is built. Using unexpected moments for growth requires emotional courage. It is easier to retreat into silence or escalate into argument than to stay present and open. Growth asks individuals to tolerate discomfort long enough to learn from it. This tolerance is a skill developed through practice, not perfection. Reframing does not mean dismissing one's own feelings. It means contextualizing them. Hurt can coexist with compassion. Disappointment can coexist with respect. When emotions are held in this balanced way, they inform rather than dominate behavior. A growth-oriented approach also considers the future. How a family responds to one unexpected moment teaches members how future moments will be handled. If conflict leads to rupture, people become guarded. If conflict leads to understanding, people become more open. Reframing, therefore, shapes not just the present interaction, but the emotional climate of the relationship. Unexpected moments often carry implicit invitations. They invite renegotiation of roles, boundaries, and expectations. When these invitations are ignored, tension accumulates. When they are accepted, relationships evolve. Growth happens when families recognize these moments as turning points rather than interruptions. Empathy expands when individuals allow themselves to be changed by the experience. Reframing is not about returning to the previous status quo. It is about integrating new information. This integration strengthens relationships because it aligns them with reality rather than nostalgia. Connection deepens when people choose understanding over control. Control seeks to prevent future surprises by enforcing rules. Understanding seeks to navigate future surprises with trust. Families built on trust are more adaptable and less reactive. Reframing also models emotional maturity. When one person responds to an unexpected event with reflection rather than reaction, it influences the entire system. Calm curiosity tends to soften defensiveness. One regulated response can shift the tone of an entire family dynamic. Growth is rarely comfortable. It often arrives disguised as disappointment or confusion. Reframing allows individuals to see that discomfort as evidence of change rather than damage. It transforms the question from "why did this happen to me?" to "what is this teaching us?" Ultimately, using unexpected moments as growth opportunities requires a commitment to relationship over ego. It prioritizes long-term connection over short-term validation. It chooses dialogue over distance, empathy over accusation, and learning over resentment. When families adopt this approach, unexpected events lose their power to divide. They become catalysts for deeper understanding, clearer boundaries, and more authentic connection. Conflict does not disappear, but it becomes constructive. In this way, surprise becomes not a threat to family bonds, but a pathway to their maturation.